Hello, and welcome to the latest in our series of video lessons and lectures into the Renaissance. And today's episode is episode 2 of our ongoing Renaissance Man series, and we're looking at Michelangelo Buonarroti, who lived from 1475 to 1564. And the title of this lesson is just Sculptor, Painter, Poet, and Architect. Quite simple. Now, sculptors and artists who make statues or other sculptures using stone, metal, or wood. In the Middle Ages, sculptors carved statues that were part of buildings, usually churches. The statues were not lifelike. Old Greek and Roman statues stood alone and were skillfully carved to show the human body as it really was. Renaissance sculptures copied them and made realistic figures. Unlike medieval statues, their statues were often nude. So when they carved up a statue, they tried to show the bones and the muscles. Again, remember we're talking about the Renaissance. Anatomy is important here, and the study of it. To do this, they often cut up these dissected dead bodies to see how they were made. Donatello was one of the first sculptors to do this. He lived in Florence, and he, of course, had the first version with his bronze statue of David. And talking about David brings us nicely on to Michelangelo. So let's take a deep dive further into examining what made this painter and sculptor tick. Will we? So in our last video, which you can go back and check if you haven't subscribed already, it's really important to look at Da Vinci and how things evolved from there. So we talked about why Da Vinci was described as the universal Renaissance man, the technique in painting that Da Vinci introduced to change the game, some of Da Vinci's famous paintings, and why was he sometimes described as a man before his time. And now what we're going to look at the training of Michelangelo back in that place again, Florence. Look at the painting works of Michelangelo, his Sistine Chapel, and learn why it is so famous. And also looking at his architectural work, the Dome of St. Peter's. So the key words here, the Sistine Chapel, Master Ghirlandaio, and the Dome of St. Peter's Basilica. So Michelangelo Buonarroti lived from 1475 to 1564. He was undoubtedly the greatest sculptor of the Renaissance. He was born near Florence. When he was 13 years old, though, his father apprenticed him to a sculptor. Soon afterwards, Michelangelo made a copy of an old Roman statue. Lorenzo de' Medici saw it and was amazed at its beauty. He invited Michelangelo to join the school for sculptors that he had in his palace. So Michelangelo is a painter. He's a sculptor. He has absolutely everything about him. So we'll look at the paintings first. The Sistine Chapel. So when he was sent to Rome, Pope Julius II then hired Michelangelo to go to Rome and paint these frescoes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. Michelangelo preferred sculpture to painting, but he didn't dare refuse the Pope. For 4 years he worked on these frescoes. In them he told the story of the creation of the world from the Bible. He began with God creating Adam and ended with Noah and the flood. He became so involved in his painting that he often forgot to sleep or eat. He dismissed assistant after assistant after assistant. Only an old servant and Pope Julius himself were allowed to watch him work. This is how particular he was. When he finished, the whole ceiling was covered with over 300 figures. The figures are life-size and done in beautiful colours. It is one of the greatest masterpieces of all time. Later, when Michelangelo was an old man, he painted a huge fresco called The Last Judgment on one of the walls of the Sistine Chapel. He painted that on his back. So, here's a quote. "My belly is pushed by force beneath my chin. My brush above my face continually makes it a splendid floor by dripping down, and I am bending like a Syrian bow, and judgment hence must grow. Born in mind, peculiar and untrue. John, come to the rescue of my dead painting now. And of my honour, I'm not in a good place, and I'm no painter." So you might want to pause this video and to enhance your understanding. Think of things like here. Do you think the painting the ceiling on his back made the painting even more difficult? From what this extract, do you think Michelangelo enjoyed painting the Sistine Chapel? And here's more pictures as they're enhanced. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The creation of Adam is enhanced. The Last Judgment, which is behind the altar of the Sistine Chapel. And again, he was forced to put clothes on the figures in the fresco. Why do you think this was? Who do you think influenced him to do this? And the clue is in where it is. Now, moving on to the next part of the video, we're going to look at David and the Pieta, and we're going to compare Leonardo with Michelangelo himself. So the Pieta and David. So, which is the medieval sculpture and which is the example of Renaissance sculpture, and explain why. If you guess that the one on the right is the Renaissance and the one on the left is medieval, you're absolutely right. It has everything we talked about: depth, perspective, that they're freestanding. So the Pieta, Michelangelo's quote on this was, he saw the angel in the marble and carved it until I set them free. So after Lorenzo's death, Michelangelo went to Rome. This is Lorenzo de' Medici, his patron. There he made a statue called the Pieta, which means sorrow. It shows Mary holding her son Jesus after his death on the cross. The Pieta is made of white marble. It's the only statue that Michelangelo ever signed. Now, we know that Michelangelo looked up to Donatello. We know that because he looked up to him, he was influenced by the statue of David, Donatello's version. Now, Michelangelo's David was created in Florence, and at this time there was a war between Florence and France. Although France was the more powerful of the two, the Florentines won. To celebrate, the town council held a competition. Both Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo entered work, but Michelangelo won the contract. Florence's victory reminded Michelangelo of the Bible story of how the boy David defeated the giant Goliath. He found a block of white marble and carved this huge statue of David. It's 5 meters high. Look at the statue. Notice how you can see every vein and every muscle. So again, when you're talking about Michelangelo, if you're looking at him towards the people in history, or you just want to gain an appreciation, talk about what you think is the interesting features of the sculptures and why they stand out. Now, Michelangelo was also the architect. Okay? He did the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, the symbol of the Catholic Church, of the Vatican City, of the head of the church. He designed the dome, died in 1564 before it was completed. Renaissance architects turned away from the medieval Gothic style and brought in new ways of building that were based on the ideas of the Greeks and the Romans. The Renaissance style had use of more domes. Churches were more symmetrical, so they looked the same on all sides. Rounder arches. You had pediments and columns. The dome was a huge development here that we can see. Okay? As well as standing out, the first famous architect of the Renaissance was Brunelleschi. He went to Rome and studied old Roman buildings like the Pantheon and worked out how to build this dome. He built the dome on the cathedral in Florence. It took 16 years to complete, but the dome became part of the typical architecture of the Renaissance, hence how you would see it here with the Vatican and the dome in St. Peter's. You also have symmetry. All Renaissance buildings followed an exact symmetrical plan. In houses, there had to be the same number of windows each side of the door. In churches, you had to have the same number of arches on each side of the aisle. You also had rounded arches. So arches would become hugely popular, and architects used them to support and decorate buildings. You know, many pictures and palaces and buildings around Rome and Italy have that. One example would be the Palazzo Rucellai, designed by Alberti. You also have pediments and columns. So pediments and columns in the Roman style became fashionable again. So look at the picture. This style became known all throughout Italy, and houses and important buildings were all built all over the world with this style. So pediment is a structure in architecture that is usually triangular that is supported by columns. Now that we finished our Renaissance Man series, what you might do to reflect and to improve your answer and the quality of your appreciation and how you understand this question is, which artist did you prefer? Leonardo or Michelangelo? And which do you think is better? You could refer to famous works, techniques the artist introduced, all the different skills that the artist possesses, such as being engineers or sculptors or poets or scientists or even architects. And we talked about the idea briefly as well of Michelangelo as a poet. So they had their own strengths and skills. Undoubtedly, Michelangelo was also influenced by Da Vinci, but it's how we look at this. But we didn't really touch on Michelangelo as the poet. He was a fine poet. He wrote over 300 love poems. Most were sonnets, based off the Shakespearean model, and his poems are some of the best ever written in Italian. He was also this great architect, and he designed, as we said, the Great Dome of St. Peter's. He also finished, looking back here, the rest of the building. You can see it throughout. Michelangelo designed many other buildings, such as the Laurentian Library in Florence. Michelangelo was almost 90 years old when he died. He never married, and is said his statues and his paintings were his children. Thanks again for listening. This concludes our series on the Renaissance men, but we'll be back real soon with another episode. Take care. See you soon. Goodbye.